Okay, it's my pleasure. We have, and for a real treat today, our speaker is Errol Arkilic. He is currently the Chief Innovation Officer and the Executive Director of the Beal Applied Innovation here at UCI. If you don't know, Beal Applied Innovation leads all of our commercial activities here at the university. So trying to take things that laboratory researchers develop and actually use them to benefit people. So prior to being at UCI, Errol was the CEO of an investment group called M34 Capital that was focused on trying to take early stage projects and bring them into commercial. So Errol's got an incredible background in addition to working with the venture investment company. He founded the I-Corps program while he was at, I think, UC Berkeley. So many of you may be familiar with the I-Corps program, and that was all done under the leadership of Errol. So Errol has also served as the CEO of Strategent Life Sciences and got his PhD from the MIT in aero and astro engineering. So it's our pleasure today to have Errol. We're honored that he can come and share, I think, what's very, very valuable information for anyone interested in moving your ideas to actually benefit people. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today, and I really welcome the invitation. We're going to be talking about why spinning a technology out of a lab is so challenging. And I just want to begin by sharing with you a little bit of my background. As Tom mentioned, I was at NSF for a number of years. I led the software and services portfolio for the SBIR program at NSF. And during that time, I was privileged to be able to support about 400 companies in my portfolio. Most of them, but not all of them, are academic spinouts. And what we found in those spinouts is there were a couple of common themes about particular types of failure. And what I'm going to do today is share with you kind of like the synopsis of all those failure modes and try to condense it in a form that is palpable and can be digested. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit more about Beal Applied Innovation here at UCI. It is a flagship program for us, and I provide here a mental model of what we do at Beal Applied Innovation. So our goal is really to take new knowledge and turn it into products and services that benefit mankind. And I have a map up here that sort of describes the cartoon version. We have ideas and research and IP that comes from the academic institution, and together we work to get it across into the commercial market. And that is obviously, it's a winnowing process. You have more ideas than eventually get across. And what we try to do at Beal is to bridge the gap between research and university knowledge and impact in industry by bringing impact and industry knowledge to the table as we are developing those transition plans. So really what we do at Beal Applied Innovation is we work at the nexus of the translation of the knowledge from left to right and the market information from right to left. And what we try to do is bridge those gaps, and through bridging those gaps, get to a point where we can really, let's see that. I don't want to do that, do I? So bridge those gaps in a way that gives us a chance to get across the so-called valley of death. And through collaboration and working together, we can increase that neck. And Tom, is there a way that we can get that fixed? Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. Let's see, is that seen on it's probably seen on sorry for the technical difficulties here. And through the process of transferring things from the left to right, we take that new knowledge and develop products and services. So why is this important here at UCI? Well, I want to share with you really four attributes. First is we have increased our research funding here at UCI from approximately $400 million to $600 million in just over 3 years. That's an incredible acceleration of effort. And that effort comes also with new faculty. There's about 250 new faculty positions and 250 faculty positions that have been revitalized. So new members of the faculty, but not new positions. And of course, what we know is that industry demands three things of us: talent, innovation, and they want to see the future. And we provide all three of those things through commercialization. And frankly, we support the activities by focusing on clusters, partnerships, and proficiency. So the moving knowledge to markets is really, there's a host of programs. I'm not going to go over these in great detail, but we have a suite of programs that do support the translation of that knowledge. And if you look at the right-hand side, we have also a host of programs that come from the market side that also address that nexus of turning that new information into products and services. So those are the two parts of the funnel that we bring together. And our really our elevator pitch is we partner with researchers and industry to move UCI knowledge and discoveries into products and markets. Some of you will recognize the company here behind on the graphic there. That's the company, thank you, that is spun out from UCI, and they are now in the market. It's a hyperspectral imaging technology for monitoring blood flow. And of course, that has lots of significant implications in the healthcare system. Okay. For those of you on Zoom, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with the laptop.
It looks good on our end.
Yeah, it didn't show on Zoom. It was only showing.
For those of you on Zoom, apologies, the slide deck is not advancing.
It's okay, David looks good.
Just slide the mouse back over to the left. It's on the right-hand screen.
Okay, I think we're back here. So let me share with you the four core functions here at Beal Applied Innovation. Basically, they research translation, that's the technology licensing office. The new ventures group, these are the people that work with teams to develop companies, enterprise collaboration, and what we call industry sponsored research. And so those four elements of the Beal Applied Innovation support these activities. And we've got our team. I want to share very quickly with our team over 100 staff years that focus on those four elements that I just described. Every one of these people is responsible for a specific segment of Beal Applied Innovation's activity, and we've got a very seasoned and experienced team that have had startups themselves, have crashed and burned, have been successful, and we're very, very fortunate to have these professionals here at UCI to help with the process. Now, what I want to do is switch gears a little bit and talk about what it is we do at what I've learned about technology licensing and why it's so difficult. And basically, there are four reasons. What I call the unknown, the confusion, third-party risk, and the big misunderstanding. And these are the elements of the failure modes that I've seen, having the experience that I've had at NSF and also subsequently in the private sector. And I've now come to realize that in the startup ecosystem, these aren't really well known or well articulated. So I'm hopeful that this will be meaningful to share these four with you. So first, let me start with the unknown. So these are projects that are spun out of academic institutions. They're all innovation projects. Some of them are also entrepreneurial activity, but they're all innovation projects. And I want to take a moment just to share with you what I mean by innovation. This is a definition that was developed by the Secretary of Commerce in the 2000s. And basically, it's the design of something new for creating new value for customers and for for the firm. And it's that newness that I want to focus in on, because if there's not something new in the product that you're taking forward, it's not an innovation. It might be a perfectly suitable entrepreneurial activity, but unless there's something new, or unless there's something that you're creating, it's not innovation. So why is this important? It's important because you have to look at the way that knowledge is disseminated. So this is a graphic that we use in the federal government, that's been used in the federal government. It's used in policy circles. It's used in academia to describe sort of the landscape of how do you get from discovery to commercialization. And this is the resources available from discovery to commercialization. And on the left-hand side, you have academics and academic research. And on the right-hand side, you have industry. And then somewhere in between, you have this so-called valley of death. And that valley of death is something that you hear of all of the time. It's a very common term that's used. And it's meant to describe that part which is where the capital starts to decrease as you move down the development cycle, but the private sector still is not ready to support the funding from industry. And that valley of death is what we've built. We built a bunch of programs, the NSF and DARPA, and what we have at Beal, Applied Innovation, the I-Corps program, the Wayfinder program. We have the SBIR and the STTR program, federal programs. They're all meant to get across that valley of death. And by getting across that valley of death, you generate earnings, and that generate earnings pays taxes, and that's the cycle of life. So that's the model that everybody in the federal government and the academics and policy circles thinks of in terms of knowledge dissemination and commercialization. That's the theory. And my point of view is that that's not accurate. This is actually not what happens. So what I want to do is share with you really what the practical matter is. So in practicality, you have something that looks like this, where on the left-hand side, you have academic research, and then you have all these programs that are meant to get across the valley of death, POP and I-Corps and Wayfinder and the SBIR and STTR programs, federal programs. But on the right-hand side, you really have something that looks like this. And that's the principal threat of all innovation projects, is that you have no idea what that right-hand side looks like going into it. And your job as an explorer is to figure out what that right-hand side looks like. And you're launching into that. And if it weren't an innovation project, you might know what that right-hand side looks like. But all innovation projects have some question as to what that looks like on the right-hand side. And that's the principal challenge. So question is, how do you explore the unknown? And I found this quote I want to share with you. In general, you look for a new law by the following process. First, you guess it, compute the consequences, compare those with nature, using observation. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's the simple key to science. Doesn't matter how beautiful your guess is. Doesn't matter how smart you are or who made the guess. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it. And I'm sure many of you will recognize this quote from Richard Feynman. This is perhaps, I think, one of the best, if not the best, definition of the scientific process I've ever seen. And essentially, it boils down to this. This is what I thought. This is what I did. This is what I learned. This is what I'm going to do next. And if you use that as a framework for uncovering what the right-hand side looks like, you can test experimentally how you go about assessing what type of support you need to get across the valley of death. This tool, the Business Model Canvas, is a tool that I've found to be very effective in helping you record what your experiments are. So when you're trying to identify what the right-hand side of that spectrum looks like, you can use this as a laboratory notebook. First, you have a bunch of guesses, and those guesses are things that you develop hypotheses around, and then you test those hypotheses, and you turn those hypotheses into facts. And then through doing that, you can drive your entire business on paper conceptually before you drive it in person. And that's a very, very powerful thought exercise. How can I identify who my customers are? How can I know what the value propositions are? What are my channels? What are my revenue streams? And how does it all fit together? In this tool, there's really nothing magic about it, but it's a very effective laboratory notebook. And this is the tool that I've used throughout my last 10 years or so to really quickly get an assessment of whether or not the opportunity that we think is in front of us is in fact an opportunity or if it's an illusion. So let's look at the innovation spectrum one more time. Remember, we're looking to try to understand what that right-hand side looks like. And through this hypothesis-driven experimental process and using the business model canvas as your tool, you can really start to see if it looks like that, okay, that's fine. Or if it looks like that, that's less good. Or if it looks like that, that's less good still. Or you might find that, in fact, the right-hand side of the chart looks something like that. In which case, the valley of death becomes what I like to call the unbridgeable gulf of death. That means there are no amount of resources available to you today to get across that valley. There is nobody on the other side waiting to catch you. And the idea is that through identifying, using the experimental process, what that right-hand side looks like, you can assess how much capital you need to get across that valley of death, how much time you need to get across that valley of death, who are the right people to help you get across that valley of death. And sometimes you find there aren't enough resources available to get across that, so we're not going to start. We're actually going to stop doing what we're doing, and we're going to find something more meaningful, more valuable to do, which is totally appropriate for a resource-constrained activity like commercializing and innovation. So part two, why is this so difficult? The confusion. This is a quote from one of my business partners. Startups fail because they confuse search with execution. What do you mean by that? This chart right here is a description of the technology adoption life cycle. Literally every technology that's been new and put forward goes through some sort of distribution where first the early adopters grab it, and then the late majority and the laggards. So this is the genesis of the S-curve that we all know and love. But the key point is that every new technology goes through some sort of adoption cycle that looks sort of like this. And the key part to understand and appreciate is that when you're starting off on the technology adoption, you're searching for your business model. You're trying to identify those early innovators, those early adopters, who in spite of all the weaknesses of you and your company, will accept your innovation because it provides something of value to them. And that's usually something different than the value that's accepted by the early majority and the late majority. And those are usually where you execute your business plan. You literally cannot sell your 50th product until you've sold your first product. And that concept is so shocking to people. I'm designing my entire organization for when we're going to scale. Well, that's great. It's perfect. I love it when it's at scale. But tell me about the first 10 people that are going to buy it. Let's identify those value propositions. Let's get it right on those 10, and then let's talk about the 50. And most people who are thinking about spending something out of an academic institution lose sight of the fact that you've got to get it into the first hands of the 10 people before you get it into the first hands of the 50 people. And so that's the sort of the default challenge there. Part three is third-party risk. Now, this is especially acute in academic spinouts because academics, by and large, don't have a deep experience in building collaborations across broad boundaries. A lot of us have a capability in our domain, but we don't necessarily work in building the capabilities with marketing or with sales or with customer service. It's just not something that we do in academic institutions. And so there's this thing called third-party risk. You will, when you're developing your company or project, you'll need key resources. And those key resources will come to you as partnerships, and those partners will themselves have their own business model. And their business model may or may not align with your business model. And if they do align with your business model, life is good. You naturally pull in the same direction. If there's a misalignment between their business model and your business model, life is hell because you are pulling in different directions. And so what you try to do when you're developing partnerships is understand where that alignment exists. And if it doesn't exist naturally, can we get to the point where we can make it? And if not, let's not have a partnership, because it's literally impossible to structure legally an agreement where there's not alignment. It just, things will go like this and life becomes very, very difficult. So this is one of the subtle but important points of an academic spin out. Bring people around the table who know how to assess alignment of your partners, because you might not naturally have it. And of course, those alignments can be totally orthogonal to your interests. And that's oftentimes what happens prelude to lawsuits. And so you try to get an understanding of what the alignment is beforehand so that you don't have that challenge as you move forward in the relationship. Now, I want to take a pause here to say almost every academic spin out has an immediate partner that they have to work with, and that's the Technology Licensing Office. The Technology Licensing Office here at UCI sits within Beal Applied Innovation, and we have deep experience in developing business models, and our interim director herself has experience taking technologies out of labs. And we know we have a business model, and that business model is aligned with the interests of the campus. Sometimes the interests of the campus aren't directly aligned with the interests of the startup, and we have to work through those. And there are 5 knobs in working through those relationships that most people don't spend the proper amount of energy on. And I just want to share with you what they are. It's equity. How much equity is the startup going to have to provide to the academic institution to get access to that IP? What's the field of use? What are the royalty payments? What's the patent prosecution? Who's going to be responsible for taking the relationship on with the patent office? And what information and board rights exist? So the majority of the business model of the tech transfer office is defined by these 5 knobs. And my assertion is that it's helpful to develop an understanding of whether these 5 knobs can get into close enough alignment before you discuss the other 15 that are inherent in the relationship. And so by doing that, you can very quickly get to a point to know where you have an understanding or not. And so that's an aside about the respective alignment of business models. Now, finally, the misunderstanding. This is a structural issue. And I want to give you a little bit of history about this particular graph that I've put up now at least 4 times. This is the world according to Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was the head of the Office of Science during the Second World War, and he convinced the United States that there was a wealth of capability in our academic institutions, and he specifically supported developing programs to ramp up research in academic institutions for the sole purposes of impacting the Second World War. And of course, the technologies that came out of the back of academic institutions include part of the Manhattan Project. They also include digital computing, logistics, metallurgy. There's a whole host of technologies that were developed in the United States out of academic institutions for the sole purpose of the United States impacting the outcome of the war. And at the end of the war, Vannevar Bush saw this mechanism built, and he went to the president and said, you know, this is a great activity. We should continue to support it moving forward. The president said to him, yeah, that's cool, but isn't that what industry does? And Bush said, no, you don't understand. We're going to separate the types of research that are developed in the United States, and we're going to call one of them basic research. We're going to call the other one applied research. Before Vannevar Bush made this case, the president, there was no distinction between basic research and applied research. And now, I can tell by the way people are nodding here, you know these are fighting words. People come to blows at conferences over the separation of basic research and applied research, and how much basic research we do versus how much applied research. And oftentimes, this is a very, very contentious topic in the circles of academia, as well as in the circles of administration, policy, government. And this structure is a direct result of Vannevar Bush's Faustian bargain with the president. And my assertion is that this isn't the only way to look at research. And there's another way of looking at the research that was promulgated by a man named Donald Stokes. And he developed a concept where you can separate the types of research into two by two matrix. And you can ask yourself, what is the motivation of the researcher in pursuing this research? Do they have a fundamental search? Are they searching for a fundamental understanding? Is that motivation high or low? And do they have a consideration for use? Is that motivation high or low? And then you can populate this 2 by 2 with different personalities. And if you have a high desire for fundamental understanding, but a low consideration for use, you might populate that with this person. Of course, you will recognize this as Niels Bohr, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics. If you have a high consideration for use, but a low consideration for fundamental understanding, you might populate it with this personality. Of course, you'll recognize that's Thomas Edison. And I want to share with you 2 quotes from these geniuses. This is what Niels Bohr said. Everything that we call real is made up of things that can't be regarded as real. Now, I don't know about you, but can you imagine motivating your startup on a rainy night, a Saturday evening, the shipping dock, by your CEO coming out and saying, everything that's real can't be regarded as real? I mean, no, you probably can't, right? It's almost comical. This is what Edison said. Anything that won't sell, I don't want to invent. It's sales, proof of utility, and utility is success. It's like he didn't really care too much about what the mechanism for that filament was, but he knew that if he could get that filament to burn for 1,000 hours, that he could change the world. And he did, and like 10 other things too. But his motivation was primarily one of utility, not one of deep understanding. He did have a team of researchers that worked very hard and diligently, but they worked in a methodical fashion, often with a design of experiments that didn't really provide elucidation, but did provide capability. Now, the 4th quadrant is really where it gets interesting, where you have both a motivation for a high understanding of fundamental understanding and a desire for application. And this is populated by a gentleman who looks like that, and you might recognize that as Pasteur. Pasteur was one of the fathers of microbiology, and he was literally funded by the French government specifically to understand how milk spoiled into cheese. The French government, like the French citizens, didn't know the mechanisms, but they knew they had a big dairy industry, and they figured, God, if we could just figure out how to do this replicably and scalably, we could dominate the world trade in cheese. And the French, by and large, even to this day, have a big business and corner on many of the cheese markets. And that research was funded by the French government, and specifically Louis Pasteur to go and pursue that. And this type of activity is what we call Pasteur's quadrant. When people say use-inspired research, and that phrase is used all of the time, what they mean is Pasteur's quadrant, that you simultaneously have a desire for fundamental understanding and an application of use. It's really a special area to be in, and it's an area where I'm sure everybody in this room and everybody on Zoom can focus their energies if you so choose. And so use-inspired research is really the special place where some new knowledge provides an angle or incentive or capability that you didn't previously have that you can then deploy in the market and get some benefit out of. This is really where hardcore technical innovation comes from. Now, this quadrant is known as Pasteur's quadrant, but it could equally be called Curie's quadrant. Many of you know her as the famous person who discovered the radiation of radium, but she also worked in the fields as a nurse. And in the First World War, she and her daughter developed an X-ray machine that they put on the back of ambulances and drove to the front lines of the First World War and picked shrapnel out of French soldiers. And many people think that that X-ray machine saved the lives of at least a million French soldiers, developed on the back of X-ray. It could also be called Washington Carver's quadrant. Many of you know George Washington Carver as the person who studied legumes, studied peanuts, studied sweet potatoes. But what you might not know about George Washington Carver is that he traveled around the southern part of the United States and worked to convince farmers that by rotating crops, you could enhance the health of the soil and therefore maintain the longevity of your farm. And through his efforts, he almost single-handedly increased the longevity of our southern part of the United States and the crops that grow there to this day. Now, it's my assertion that, again, everybody can do use-inspired research, and that use-inspired research comes at that special quadrant where it's both practical and you desire fundamental understanding. So this is a quote that I want to share with you. It's the world according to Pasteur. There's no such thing as applied science, only applications of science. I love this quote. This captures the entire essence of what it is that we do when we try to take new knowledge and turn it into products and services. It's not applied science in an application of science. And he said this in 1871. So as wrapping these things up, I want to close by just a few short takeaways, and then one more slide on BAI, Beal Applied Innovation. 5 takeaways. Innovation contains the unknown. You have to address the unknowns. The best way to address that is through the scientific process. Don't confuse the unknowns with not knowns. I didn't talk about that in great detail, but it's key to appreciate. There are some things in the world that you just don't know, but somebody else does know. Don't use the experimental process to figure those out. Go do your homework, pick up the phone, call somebody who knows the answer, get those answers. Experimental process can be expensive. And so don't confuse not knowns with unknowns. Use the business model canvas as a laboratory notebook and assess your potential partners. Don't confuse search with execution. And then finally, do use-inspired research. If you want to make an impact in the world, there is no better way to make an impact than to take new knowledge and turn it into products and services that benefit mankind. It's a way for you to do well. It's a way for you to do good. And in fact, it's a definition of human progress. So that's what I wanted to leave you with the 5 takeaways. With respect to the integration of Beal Applied Innovation for UCI, I'm hopeful that we can work together over the next several years to integrate the Chief Innovation Officer role with UCI through the research and tech agenda. We can help you prepare better proposals in terms of commercialization impact if we're there at the time that the proposal is getting written. So it's like anything that has a quality component to it. It's better to engineer or design in the quality component than it is to tack it on to the end. We're hopeful that we can together develop a UCI common voice for the impact of innovation. And that is obviously a skill in marketing and communication. We can provide help in doing that. That's something that we want to provide to everybody at Beckman Laser Institute. And we can help with collaboration landscape. We have a view of the university that is not common. We support all the schools. We see all of the intellectual property that's developed by the school runs through our office. We have the industry-sponsored research group, so we have a view of the interaction with industry. And it's our hope that we can, by having that worldview, provide value to researchers who are trying to build connections with industry. And then finally, we want to help the translation climate by talking about the importance of this, continuously talking about the importance of this, so that we can work together to make a bigger impact on that $600 million of research that's coming in the front door. And then I want to leave you one more time with the elevator pitch that we have here, which is measurably improving lives through access to UCI developed knowledge. That's what we do at Beal Applied Innovation, and it's my hope that we can work with you over the coming months and years to help increase that impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Earl. That's fantastic. We're going to have questions both from the audience here in the conference room here at the Beckman as well as online. So I'll go back and monitor the chat for those questions. But maybe if anyone here has a question, we can start and then we can go to Zoom.
Thanks, Tom. Please.
Working on academic pursuits, how early do you think, oh, sorry, thank you. Working on research, how early do you think one should start thinking about this, the potential application of your work into industry?
I think it's really, if you're trying to do use-inspired research, it's literally never too early. And it's also this iteration process. So it's not like it's one or the other. It's this, you're talking to people who are going to ultimately potentially benefit, to make sure that you even understand what the problem is as you're going through the research. But there's literally no time where it's too early, if you're doing use-inspired research, to be talking to the users or the potential customers of that. Now, of course, at some point you have to put the voices at bay and go do some development work. But by that time, you should have been so informed by the needs of the market that you're pretty sure that your trajectory is set, at least for that next waypoint. And that next, you get to that waypoint and then you do the process again. But don't hesitate from getting out and talking to people early and often. Now, you have to be thoughtful about how you handle IP when you do that. But the key point is that you're really not trying to convince somebody that you have a solution. You're trying to understand what the problem is so that you solve the right problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a nice talk. Actually, I want to follow up with the question as well. So, as a faculty at UCI, so what is the time to have the startup? Like, so we have more patent first, and then try to have a prototype device to demonstrate to the investors. Like, do you have any advice on this?
Yeah. So let's not confuse the investment process with the solution, the developing the solution process. So your development of the business model and the understanding of whether or not there's a business here, you can do with very modest amounts of capital, a couple $1,000. And that is what you do before you develop a startup. Because you might find that there is nobody in the market that's going to value your solution as much as you do. And you want to find that out early. And you do that actually before you incorporate. Because once you incorporate a company, you've got a legal entity, and and my counsel is you work to understand what the landscape is before you incorporate the company, and only incorporate the company if you feel confident that that landscape is a landscape that provides you the type of benefit that you think it will. And the reason for developing a corporate entity is because you're starting to take on some risks, some liability. Either you're taking on an investor, or you're negotiating something with the tech transfer office, or you're building something that might have some product liability. So it's only when you get to that point that you really need to incorporate. Everything that you do beforehand, before you incorporate, is trying to understand whether or not there's a business there. And that you can do without a deep corporate structure. And that part also is something that you can do early in the process, because you're not taking on really any liability or risk, or even partnership risk. You're out talking to people, trying to figure out if there's a there. And then the specifics you can talk to more when you talk to your technology licensing officer. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Have some chat here. Let's go back. Leonard Lane asks if the audience can get your slides.
Of course.
Okay. Shout out from Elliot Botvinnik for Don Beal. And I think this goes for all of us. We're very grateful for your generous support of all the innovators here at UCI. Elliot, we asked, can you share more about what Applied Innovation has planned in terms of helping faculty early in the proposal process?
So I don't have to repeat the question because I think you were talking into the mic, right? Okay. So we very quickly glossed over the slides of the programs that we have in support of the development of the proposal process. But Elliot, thank you for the question. The key thing that I want to convey is that the earlier we are involved in the process, the greater impact that we can have in terms of bringing industry to the table. Trying to get an industry support letter a week before the proposal is in makes it very, very difficult for us to, and also, frankly, it tasks and tests our partnership in ways that we don't want to. We would rather start early in the process and talk about the particular vector that you're pursuing and work with particular industry partners that we can bring to the table together to walk into that activity so that by the time that we ask for that support letter, it's not an 11th hour request. It's already something that we have in place. And so the primary organization within our office that does that activity is the New Ventures Group, and that's led by Matt Hansen. And Matt is available to sit down with anybody who's thinking about developing a proposal and talking to them about the steps that they might go through in doing some early stage customer discovery. And to the extent that we can help with those dialogues and those introductions, we will. But we want to do that early in the process as possible, not a week before the end of before the proposals due, where we end up having to call up somebody and ask for a favor.
Thank you. I have a question. You mentioned, was it third party? Was it
Third party risk?
Yeah, third party risks. So that one sort of resonated for me. And yeah, I could imagine there'd be third party risks that you don't recognize, but from your perspective, which is, a lot more objective probably than most of us, can you prioritize which kind of third parties might pose more risk than others?
Yeah, so the third party risk can come in the form of your first investor. And often that one is the one that if you mess up, it's hard to get back from. It can also come from your first customer. And if you don't get that relationship right, if you give away too much of the technology, or if you give away too much of the market to a potential channel partner, that can really hurt you. And so those two are the ones that exist. But also maybe even before that, the third party risk of your team, and recognizing that the team itself might have misaligned interests. One person may want to pursue a particular type of business approach, and the other person might want to pursue another type. And getting those conversations out and early is also appropriate. So the third party is the third party to the company, and it can exist among the team as well as your partners and customers, investors, even service providers.
Yeah, thank you. I've seen it play out so many times. That
What do you think is the biggest one?
I would think the investor, but all of them. Well, I guess I would look at it two ways. Any third party risk that you don't see.
Yes, the one that you don't see. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. If you see it, you can manage it.
Right.
Now, so you sort of have to group them. But like an investment third party risk, even if you see it and don't quite estimate it right or assess it properly, it still will come back and bite you.
Yep.
I've seen the CEO thing. It's pretty much a concept that
Monopoly.
yes. Yeah.
That's an area where I think really strong, seasoned advice can be worth its weight in gold, proverbially. And having somebody who's been there and done that, who can anticipate the divergence of the misalignment and try to get that out on the open, can be extremely valuable, and a good advisory board or even a good board of directors can help with that when you have those conversations.
Okay, we have Carrie Athanasu has a question. I'll just read what he wrote. Earl, we're delighted at UCI that we have a leader of your caliber directing translation, innovation, and entrepreneurship. My view is that BAI is exceptional for covering the early phases of I&E. Are there any thoughts about how to increase help further past the point of creating a startup?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carrie. And I think that the way that I'm going to respond to that is that we have historically focused on the top part of the funnel. And that was the appropriate place to focus historically when we were at a 300 million or even less in terms of the research budget. But as that research budget increases, the top of that funnel gets bigger. And if we don't get very disciplined and learning how to triage that top part of the funnel, we will never be able to support more deeply into the funnel. And so I think what we have to do, and what we are doing, is assessing which of those projects early on are going to benefit most from that deeper touch and that white glove capability, and help those as a trajectory deeper in the process. But what that means is being very selective in the top part of the funnel. And so that's going to be a cultural shift for us, and one that is it's going to require some effort and capability and tact.
Thank you.
So when working with BAI, how hands-on or hands-off can you be as a PI or a researcher? And then to add to that, what kind of percentage do you still get to keep of whatever startup or business that spins out?
I'll answer the second question first, and then then we'll take the first. So in terms of what equity ownership you get as an inventor, it's determined by, are you taking the license or are you just letting the license go to somebody else? It's determined by how many people are on the team. It's determined by how much equity is going to need to be purchased by your investor to get you to that next stage. So it's impossible to answer the question about, and as an inventor, how much do you walk away with, because there's just so many different pathways. But what I will convey is that with respect to the technology licensing, the amount of equity that a BAI UCI will take is in the low single digits, 5-ish. The amount of royalties that that the university will target is in the low single digits. And so those are fair terms that some subsequent investor will look at and say, yeah, that seems fair, and we can invest in that. And that's based upon years, decades even, of assessing what deal structures look like. And so we have an information advantage because we see hundreds of deals, and as an entrepreneur, you see one. And so sometimes that conversation revolves around us sharing the knowledge, the collective knowledge that we have around what deal terms look like. And but the answer to the question of how much equity you walk away with, it's impossible to answer that question. It needs to be enough to motivate you to do the hard work that's required to get that stuff out of the lab. And every investor, every strategic partner will recognize that as the key element of the fairness quotient. Is this person going to be motivated by the amount of equity that they have in order to do all the hard work to get it out the door? And if you get below that line, then all of a sudden your bad deal is my risk, because now I'm seeing, oh, this person may leave because they don't have the benefit of the upside anymore. So that's the market balance that's struck when you start talking about equity and equity percentage points.
Okay, cool. And so like the first investment, what kind of percentage equity do you typically see?
Again, it's all over the place, right? So if the first investment is just a very, very modest investment to prove out some specific element of your business model, it can be a loan, literally, and say, hey, this is a loan, and if it goes forward, we can price the round at some amount. If it's a biotech, it's a pharmaceutical, and we need to get to an FDA trial, phase 1 clinical, then it's different, right? And so it's situationally dependent. And instead of describing to you a specific situation, what I would say is talk to your partner in Beal and see if they can provide you some guidance as to what this particular situation mandates for it, or to be a deal that can move forward in a market-driven economy.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
So typically for a faculty to start a startup company, what kind of involvement they involve in the company? So there will be a co-founder, or they will be the CEO, or like what's your suggestions on that?
So my suggestion is usually revolves around identifying those people early on in the project that can take the project from the lab out the door and into the building across the street. And that typically is not the faculty member as the CEO, because the faculty member typically has a job that requires them to be, in present 80% of the time at least. And so my guidance often is to a faculty member, identify the graduate student or the postdoc, or every once in a while it's an undergraduate, who can really be that person to take the technology and walk it through all of the challenges that need to be met. Now, I'll also say that selfishly, that a faculty member can do 1 or 2 startups, maybe. A graduate group can do 15, right? Because there's so many more people that we can support if we're talking to the graduate students versus the faculty member as the C-suite. Now, what is the appropriate role for a faculty member? My experience is that the faculty member is most valuable when they can be the person that is pointed to in the investor and say, you see that person over there? They have access to talent, they have access to facilities, they have access to resources, and they're motivated to see the success of this company. And so that person's going to stay where they're most valuable, and we're going to build this rocket ship that's going to take off, and the faculty member stays where they are. Now, there are exceptions, and I don't want to just say that it's only this pathway, but if you do a statistical, the predominance is that it's led by somebody other than a faculty member. You're welcome.
I think we have another Zoom comment here. Elliot, we basically reinforcing Carrie. I think we're all very happy to have you here. Also, a lot of people on the chat are.
Thanks, Elliot. Thanks, Carrie.
Okay. Any more questions from Zoom or here in person? Okay. If not, let's thank Errol once again. Oh, I'm sorry.
It looks like Don Beal raised his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Don, go. Sorry, please.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Hi, Don.
Yeah, I'd like to personally thank several of you who acknowledged the role of Ken Beal and I in applied innovation, but more importantly, it's completely appropriate to have this at the Beckman Laser Institute, such a great source of innovation for UCI and for the companies that have developed from it. But I, most importantly, want to recognize Errol. We are so fortunate to have him. We've come a long way in building the innovation and commercialization structure. But I think Errol is clearly the kind of leader we need to take it to the next level. And I just wanted to add those comments.
Thanks for those kind words, Tom.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending. I think this has been a great seminar. I think Earl's experience is just fantastic. I mean, when I spoke with Errol shortly after he joined, he told me about how usually faculty being CEOs usually result in crash and burn. And I thought, well, we need some of our faculty to hear that story. So thank you, Errol. It's great.